Okay, so this video here is a follow-up of one that I did, last spring, I guess, where I had bought a cheap hydrogen alpha filter for my Nikon D50, and I bought a 72 millimeter one that would fit over the lens. They sell other sizes. You can get 1 1/4, and I think you can get a 2-inch, and you can get different filter sizes, like if you have a 52 millimeter filter and what have you. And when I tested it then, the first time out, I was doing the Rosette Nebula, and I was quite happy here. I was able to see it, and which was a lot better than when I was just doing full spectrum with no filter. I could barely get something, but it was not very good. Wasn't much better than with no filter on, a stock camera, just because I was picking up all kinds of infrared light, apparently. And then I saw that they had a oxygen 3 filter available too for the same size, and these were like $40 to $50 a piece. I don't remember the exact price. So I bought that too, and I started doing some testing this summer, so I'll show you that. So when I did the North American Nebula the first time with it, and this picture's slightly cropped because my screen recorder's not quite as big here as the picture. But anyway, this is just a straight out of the camera exposure viewing the raw file with a viewer, honey view. And I'm like, hey, I was excited about this. Started to see some detail. Looked a lot better than what I was doing with a stock camera, and a lot better than no filter at all on a full spectrum camera. So then I decided, well, let's try the 03 filter as well and see. I was hoping that maybe I'd find a little bit of blue peeking out here and there, because I have seen some pictures where some people did, where they used oxygen 3 on stuff like this, even though it's mainly a HAI object. So we'll bring the 03 up, and as you can see, this looks a bit different. It's not quite in focus. So the hydrogen alpha one and the oxygen 3 filters do not focus it at the exact same point, which really makes sense because they're different wavelengths. That's why you have issues with refracting telescopes, for example, with achromatic versus apochromatic, because the colors want to focus at different points, so it's real expensive to make a corrector. But now if I had done this on a telescope instead of the camera lens with my manual focus and just going to infinity, wouldn't have been any big deal. I would have just focused on each one. But the problem turned out to be, at least with the camera lens here, I needed to actually go past infinity, focusing farther away, in order to get the oxygen 3 one to go in focus. And I'll show you here a little quick video snippet I just filmed explaining how I worked around that. Okay, so here's the issue I ran into when I tried to use the oxygen 3 filter over the front of my old manual camera lens. It's a Nikon D50 camera, same one I've been using. And this lens is a Nikon H series 300 millimeters. So this is, it's old school. You can see it's got the manual focus. This thing was built a good 50 years ago. They made them in the late 60s and early 70s, I think. And it's Nikon Nikkor H series. And anyway,
What I've normally been doing with this, any photography I was doing, whether I was using a stock camera or what have you, I would just turn the ring here to infinity, because it has a lock, kind of, it just stops. And as luck would have it, that worked out just fine with my stars, and they may not have been perfect, but they were plenty close enough. And when I tried the hydrogen alpha filter, had the same thing, it was fine. So then I thought, well, I'm going to buy the oxygen 3 filter as well. And it was not in focus at that point. It actually, I experimented with it. I thought, well, do I need to go a little this way? I'm kind of exaggerating. I didn't. Or do I need to go past infinity? And what I needed to do was go beyond it. And I can't do it on this lens unless I was to get brave and try to open it up and make it go past it, infinity. But then there was another problem. This lens here is so heavy with all its glass. If I have it pointed up at the sky, and let's say I had it to where it would work with oxygen 3, and then I wanted to use a different filter or no filter, and I rotate it back a little, it starts moving. I'm not touching it. As you can see, it rotates right back to the lock. So we'll take her all the way back to like 60 for a minute here. And it starts gradually moving because of the weight of the glass. Now I'll show you this other lens I have here, and it doesn't have that problem. So this lens is a 400 millimeter, and even though it's longer, it's actually much lighter than that 300. And this is see if we can get the front of it. It's a Spiratone brand. So this was kind of like a generic thing that they were making back 70s, 80s. I'm not sure how old this one is. But I bought this for I think I paid $30 or $40 on eBay. And I didn't expect much from it because it's such a cheaper lens, but it actually works quite well. And it has the same filter size as the 300. But this is one of these lenses where they would make one generic type that was good for multiple camera brands. So this here, it had down here where you connect to the camera, there's an adapter to adapt to Nikon. This part here, the barrel, just threads right into this adapter so that you can attach it to a Nikon mount. And if you had, for example, a Canon camera or Minolta or whatever, you'd just have their adapter on it. And I think because of that, when I get to the focus ring here, it actually allows you to rotate past infinity. So this, if I can get my finger up here, that center red line above the 6.3 in the middle of the arrow, that's the center part. If I was truly on infinity, let me stand it up, it would be centered. So that should be centered on that infinity figure 8 looking thing. Should be centered above, the center of it should be above the red line to be infinity, but it allows me to go a little past it, kind of to the edge of it, to the right edge. And that happened to be just enough that I could get the oxygen 3 filter in focus. And then I could also have it back here for HA or whatever, or no filter at all. And this lens, I didn't have any problem with it moving. I had been using this before with no filter at all, and figured out by accident that it goes past and that I had to adjust it. And it wouldn't rotate back on me. I can send it back here a little ways. And the glass isn't so heavy. It just sits there just fine. So I was able to shoot a test at 400 millimeters with both hydrogen alpha and oxygen 3. and get them in focus.
So before I did it with the 400 millimeter, I thought, well, I'll go over to the Veil Nebula and see what happens with my 200 millimeter lens and see if I have the same issue with focus. One of the things I noticed, like I showed you there with my 300, you know, the lens kept moving on me because it was so heavy. I had to actually focus at the infinity lock if I had it pointed up at the sky. And this lens here, the glass is lighter, so it wouldn't have that problem, but the 200 doesn't go past infinity like the 400 does. So I could, if I wanted to, I could either try to do surgery on that lens and allow it to go past, or if I wanted to pick up another lens cheap and play with it and not this one. So I don't know, someday I may mess with this one here. There are videos of how to open them up. I've never tried it. So here's the hydrogen alpha of the Veil. This is straight out of the camera. And let's see, this was a 15-minute exposure. I think I was doing, I'd have to look again. I was either doing 5 or 10 with the others. Usually what I had been doing, if I wasn't using any kind of filter, I found at ISO 400, a 5-minute exposure wasn't bad at all. And I'd experimented going longer. I tried ISO 200 because it might have a little wider range to get more detail. And I actually went as long as 30 minutes and it worked. But when you go that long, if you have a problem, you just lost 30 minutes on one frame. But these were 15 minutes because of the filter. And see, I'm getting some of the Veil, but there's a lot of noise in here, and I'll show you when some of them where I tried to process. I had problems getting this really clean, and I'm going to keep playing with it and trying to do more light. And I wondered too if some of it was maybe a light leak. I've been hearing some people say that it's possible with a DSLR to actually have light leak in through the viewfinder where you put up to your eye when you're doing a really long exposure. You wouldn't have a problem doing normal photography, but if you're doing 5 and 10 minute exposures, you can get some light in. So then when I tried the oxygen 3 filter here on the Veil, you can see the stars here, they're blown up, they're still out of focus, and I'm picking up little wisps of the Veil. But I realized, you know, I shouldn't spend too much time with it, you know, because it really might not help me. And then I'll show you a test I did with the 400 millimeter lens, and I was able to get focus. Okay, so here's on the 400 millimeter lens. I decided to do a portion of the North American Nebula. Some people call it the Cygnus Wall. It's not showing up real good on here, but there's some detail there. And then the Pelican Nebula would be over up here somewhere. And then there's Amp Glow up there at the top of those little blobs. So that would just get removed by the dark frame. But some of this background noise in here doesn't get removed with dark frames or bias, and I'm not sure if that was something to do with the light leaks. As a matter of fact, this time I put black electrical tape over the viewfinder just to try to block light from coming in, and I'm not sure if it made a difference or not. I live in a dark enough area. I think a lot of the people that have issues, if you live in town and there's, you know, outdoor lighting everywhere and your yard's really not dark, you can get a lot more light leaking in through your viewfinder. Or if you have a Newtonian scope, some people are putting covers over the back end, over the mirror on the outside, to try to keep light from leaking in the other end of the tube and working its way around the mirror. And I've noticed a lot of the people that do that, I think they live in, like I say, really big cities, but it could be an issue anywhere. Okay, and then here with the oxygen 3 filter on the Veil, with the, or on, I'm sorry, not the Veil, but the North American Nebula area with the 400 millimeter lens, I was able to get focus. So I just focused the HA filter and the O3 filter slightly different. I turned, for the oxygen 3 filter, I turned it all the way to that lock on the camera lens, so it went slightly past infinity. And on the hydrogen alpha one, I had to back it off a little bit to the center of the infinity symbol. But now that I've done that, I've got nice sharp stars and got quite a few of them. And I can kind of barely see, I don't know if it's showing up on here, but there is some area there that it's picking up some nebulosity. So I think if I had a really low noise camera, and maybe too if it was cool out, since I'm doing this, it was close to 70 degrees out, I guess. And as another thing I was thinking about, if you're up on cooled astronomy cameras where they're cooling them off to like -10 Celsius, -15 Celsius and all that, they can keep track of their sensor temperature and everything. Now, when I've been doing my pictures, I've been keeping a log of what the ambient temperature is outdoors, and just seeing what kind of a difference it makes. And also sometimes I could just use the dark frames from a previous night. If it was 65 degrees both nights, I'd just use the darks. But what I don't know is the actual internal temperature of the camera, because my information doesn't tell me what that is. But on a camera like my ZWO ASI 178MC, the planetary camera, its information tells me the sensor temperature all the time. I see it on the screen when I'm working with it. And one interesting thing here, you can see the oxygen 3 color. See, it gives you the blue-green color. And anything red you see here, that's thermal noise, because none of that is coming through the camera filter, because it's blocking all the red light. So those red blobs up in the upper left-hand part are thermal noise from the heat of the camera, the heat of the sensor, I guess. And looks like there's a hot pixel or something right there. I see a bright red spot. And that stuff would just get removed in the dark frame. But then if there was light leaking through when I'm taking a picture, but not when I'm taking a dark frame, then the dark frame wouldn't remove it. And I can play around and airbrush it out like I have with some of my other pictures. It's just a matter of how much patience you have and how much time you want to take. So right now, at least, I'm finding that the best thing for me to do is to keep, with these difficult targets, keep doing the hydrogen alpha and try to get a lot of time on it. And for oxygen 3, I don't see much sense right at the minute in trying to invest a bunch of hours imaging if it's barely going to show. But I do want to try, there's some brighter objects. Later this fall and winter, the Orion Nebula is such a bright one, I might be able to use this same camera lens and get some nice pictures, because I think, that's bright enough. Maybe I can get something where it shows some detail between the two. But I think to really get the use out of that filter with some of these other objects, I'd need a lower noise camera or figure out something to do with that, or whether it's a light leak or whatever. So here I've got one of these straight up stacked files. This is the Rosette Nebula in hydrogen alpha, and I'll bring this thing down to a smaller size so we can see what I'm doing a little better. Okay, I've made GIMP a little bit smaller here, just so I'll go up here to my colors and levels, and my image is way off the left, so I'll grab my center slider here and start dragging it quite a ways left and stretching it. And as you can see, the veil's starting to show. Before, on that raw file that I showed you where it was just a straight up picture straight out of the camera, when you view that through a program like Honey Viewer, it goes ahead and does a little bit of rudimentary processing to give you something viewable. So here, when I first start with GIMP, it's not been stretched at all, and it might just look solid black. Now, if you crank up your exposure enough, like when I did 30 minutes at ISO 200, this image area, it was way over towards the right. So I didn't have to stretch, I just dragged my slider from the left. So we'll stretch this a little just to kind of give you an idea. My other video of it is a little more in depth of what I was doing with it. And of course, one of the tricks that I have to learn about, since everything's so red here, if I was shooting this, if I had, say, red, green, and blue, when you combine them, then your background won't look all red. And the same with your the Oxygen 3. As a matter of fact, the O3 filter, it shows up in the green and the blue. Like this one here, I'll turn off the red eyeball, and it does have a little bit that's leaking through, kind of the stars, and it looks like there's barely something in the blue. But basically, it's at least all your nebulosity is in the red. And really, if you had an expensive filter like this that was, you know, one of them that cost a few $100s, you really shouldn't have anything in the green and the blue channel at all. But see here, we'll try to make it just show up a little more. And as you can see, it is getting, you know, you can definitely see the nebula. So with some practice and with probably several hours of light, I can start to get something. So I'm going to be adding to these that I've been shooting. Like when I did M31 last fall and winter, I had a couple of years worth of it where I did, I think I had 11 hours worth over 7 separate nights or something, and was able to combine them. And so this is starting to come out. And then we'll go over to, we'll just kill that. So now who we got here? This is the O3 filter. This should be the 400mm lens. I'll try to center this up, fit image in window there. I think I got the, yeah, I think that's the right camera. Go ahead and start stretching it. So see, I got room to do more exposure time. And as a matter of fact, while I'm thinking about it, I ended up doing, when I used this 400mm lens, which oh, this one here is actually the 200. Okay, this is the veil. But when so this here's at ISO 400. When I did it through the 400mm, that lens is f6.3 instead of 4.5, I believe is what that was. And so I ended up cranking up the ISO because I noticed that when I was trying to just do position to find the stars and plate solve it to find my object, I wasn't getting hardly any stars when I did ISO 400 for 30 seconds, which is usually fine to get stars only. So I ended up taking it up to 1600 and did it, and it showed lots of stars. So I just decided to, I think I did 5-minute exposures at 1600 on that. And this one here, like I say, this is the 200mm lens, getting off track a little. And so these were the 5-minute ones. I'll bring this up a little to show that the O3 filter is getting some of the veil is coming through, and then we'll go over to the hydrogen alpha one, which this one here worked much better. We'll get this stretched up a bit so we can, this one really starts to show you a lot more of the veil. And one of the reasons I did this at the 200 millimeter lens, a lot of people, if you have longer focal lengths, they just do, I think this area up here is what they call the witch's broom. At Bright Star, I think it's Cygnus number 52 star. But there's a lot of detail coming all through the middle here too, which is harder to get. But the veil is actually one great big circular bubble-like type of thing. And then after I removed the stars, I did a starless. So I'll show you that and show you what kind of issues I'm fighting with noise or light leak or whatever it is. Okay, so here's the hydrogen alpha veil 200 millimeter lens after I've removed the stars in StarNet, and it's already stretched a little bit so you can see the stars. If you've seen my video on StarNet, you have to stretch it some so that the stars show up so that it can find the stars in order to remove them. So I'll start stretching this out a little and try to really crank on the nebula. And of course the whole idea of this is you can concentrate on stretching the nebula without having the stars blow up great big. And as you can see, this is starting to come up, but then I've got a lot of excess back in here. And there might actually be some dust and stuff, but I'm not sure that I'm picking up that. I'm starting to get stuff in here. So you see, I've stretched this quite a bit. You remember it was just a real tiny, skinny thing, and it was off the left edge. If you stretch too much, it starts to, you get over processed. You just kind of learn from experience, I guess, of where you say, oh, I did that before and that was a little too much and it burnt me. Made it start looking not very good. So while I'm thinking about it, I'll show you a picture. I just took a screenshot off of Wikipedia of a picture of the veil just to get an idea of what is actually there. So this little screenshot's off the Wikipedia website, and they call it the Cygnus loop, which is just part of the veil. And this picture was actually taken with a satellite. Down here it talks about it. I guess Galex was the name of the satellite, and it said it couldn't have been taken from the surface of the Earth because the ozone layer blocks ultraviolet light. As you can see, this area over here, I think this is the side they call the witch's broom. I might have them backwards. But you can see there's a lot of little faint details in there, and you have the big bubble. So I am starting to pick up some of that stuff in here. If I'll go to curves and try to really crank the contrast. And one thing I discovered when I was playing around a day or two ago, I can get rid of some of this garbage in here, but who knows what all I'm losing with it. I'm kind of hoping that I don't, because normally you don't want to, when I drag this across here to make the shadows darker, this stuff here is supposed to be actual image, and not noise anything that was over here to the left of the histogram. Is supposed to be the garbage. But it's, like I say, it could be that it's a light leak. It could be, I'm not sure what it is. I don't know if it's possible that infrared light is actually finding its way through. One thing I did do, I've played around with infrared photography a little bit on some of my videos where I bought some IR filters and started playing around. And I thought, well, I'll just go out and take a picture during the daytime with this filter. And if it was letting through infrared light, the green trees and green grass would start to turn white. And they weren't doing that. And this isn't supposed to leak any infrared light through at all. But this filter, I think it's 20 nanometers wide, and the expensive filters for narrow band, they go down. Nowadays you can probably get them less than a nanometer, but I can remember a few years back they were like 7 nanometers, 12 nanometers. They just keep getting better and better all the time. But as long I keep dragging this over, moving the black farther into this, so that means I'm cutting off the image to the left of this circle there. So if I gradually do that and just be patient and play with it, I'm actually starting to get rid of some of this trash. And I wondered about, since a lot of that is over in the left side, remember my amp glow, these bubbles come up here and here, and I wondered if a lot of that was from like heat of the camera over here. But then I thought, well, why doesn't the dark frame get rid of it? And now this blob here, I think that's because there was a bright star over in that area, and StarNet removed the star, but there was some glow around it that it didn't remove. So I'll play with this a little here. And like I said, I'm just doing this kind of quick and dirty, but the idea is, even with kind of a noisy camera like what I got in this cheap filter and cheap camera, it is possible to get, you know, some kind of image of this. And even though it's not as pure, I can airbrush this junk out. I can paint over it and just paint it in black, which I did that with like M31. I had I made a mask and made a real high contrast mask to protect this. But then the mask, it starts wanting to mask this stuff out as well. So then you just paint that out. But, you know, when I get close up here, it'll be harder to tell. I would have to be really, really patient, I guess, and get what I could. And then, of course, this thing is so red when I go and combine it back with the stars, and if I want to try to make a full color image, it looks super red. So I've still got quite a bit of learning to do, but I will eventually get some kind of cool picture out of this. And for fun here, we'll take it. I'm going to drag the saturation scale here way back and turn this into black and white. So then at least I'm not, you know, if I don't want, before I learn how to mess with all the colors, I could just do black and white images of things like that as well. But anyway, I wanted to share a little bit of that and kind of give you an idea. These cheap filters do work. It's just a matter of, you know, how much money you want to invest. And to be honest with you, you know, if you go out and buy all the real expensive equipment, you can definitely get better results, but you can't expect to have it be like point and shoot. You know, if you want that, basically get online and just download a picture, because the more equipment you add, the more complicated your system gets, because you'll end up, it's like when people do a lot of this monochrome cameras where they have a black and white camera, which is really what you're supposed to use when you do narrow band like this. But there's people that, some of these companies are making these dual band filters, which are designed really for a color camera. And they'll shoot like oxygen 3 and hydrogen alpha at the same time, and they can even add sulfur. They can have what they call a tri-band. And some of those filters probably cost $200 or $300. But some of the people really like them, and that's a way to do their narrow band stuff with a color camera. Anyway, but when you start adding things, like say you get your narrow band, you end up, say if you add usually a lot of these people, they do those, they end up adding a focal reducer and a flattener so that the stars are flat and round all the way around. And then you have to have the backspace just right, and that can get real touchy because you're dealing with a millimeter or less. And if your spacer that you buy isn't exactly the right thickness uniformly all the way around, it can tilt your camera sensor a little. And on the really new cameras, you know, if you get one that's got 25, 30 megapixels, 50 megapixels, whatever, they start picking up all the problems too. They pick up all kinds of great stuff, but anything that goes wrong, it really jumps out because it just shows you all the detail. And then they would usually add something like, say, a filter wheel. And if you have an automatic filter wheel, you're going to have a power cable to run it, and also a USB cable for the signal to tell it which filter to go to. And then when you add an electric focuser, you run into the same idea. You've got to have at least a modern electric focusers. You would add your power cable and a USB cable, and it has some kind of a temperature sensor on a lot of those, because when especially like in the winter time, when your temperature drops a lot, like say, you know, you start off your night and maybe it's 35 degrees and a couple hours later it's down to 25, that big temperature change, I guess the metal expands and contracts just a tiny bit and it throws the focus off. So they can keep track of that. But you can, you know, it's really just how much you want to get into. I like trying to keep this as simple and as inexpensive as I can, and that allows me to have different pieces of equipment too. You know, I don't have to be stuck on just 200 millimeter focal length or 400 or 600 or whatever. It's cheap to buy another lens or use another camera. So anyway, hopefully this kind of gives you an idea of what you might expect if you bought one of these really inexpensive narrow band filters. And as a matter of fact, while I was thinking about it, I mentioned that the hydrogen alpha, I think it was 20 nanometers wide. The oxygen 3 filter, they didn't actually show, you know, an advertised width, but they have a graph on the picture. I'll try to find it if I've got it. I think I still have it. If I have it, I'll include it in the video. But it looks like that thing might be as much as 50 nanometers wide, which is probably why it shows up in both the green and blue channel. It actually has the nebula in both. Okay, I found the information here, these graphs. So in case I didn't already mention it, I picked up both of these filters, the oxygen 3 and the hydrogen alpha, on Aliexpress, and they were in the vicinity of $50 each, and the prices ranged a bit and depended on which filter size you bought. So this one here for the 03, so it's saying that it's centered at 501 nanometers, which is pretty close to the line between blue and green. So you'd have blue over in here somewhere. Well, actually, I guess way over here be ultraviolet. So if you figure 400 about is where visible light starts, and it goes to about 700. And then on to the right of that is your infrared. So if this is centered at 501, let me zoom in a little on it. Looks like it goes a good 25 each way. So it's about 50 wide. So that's pretty wide for so-called narrow band. But it works. So then let's look at the hydrogen alpha filters graph. And this one here, it says the H alpha is centered at 656 nanometers, which is over in the red. So that's what we were getting into before. So I guess blue goes from about 400 to 500, and green would go from about 500 to 600 if I've got this figured right, and then red would go from 600 to 700. And the HA, as you can see, lands in here about 656, and this has a considerably narrower path than the other one. Which I say, the other one, the 03 one, they didn't advertise a bandwidth on it, but it seems to be about 50, and I say it seems like it straddles the blue and the green. So one thing I've thought about is if I get this figured out right, you could actually take an image and you would get your red, green, blue just with the 2 filters and 2 exposures. And since I made the other part of the video the night before last night was clear out, and I went out and did more exposures with the 200 millimeter lens and the hydrogen alpha filter, and got like another 3 hours. And I was thinking about it, and I thought, I only had 30 minutes of each on that one I was looking at. So if I had 5, 6, 7 hours total, that's what I'm up to on this. I'm up to 7 hours total on HA. If I get that much on oxygen 3, maybe I can get an image that looks good where I can combine them. So that's another thing about using all these extra filters and stuff, especially if you try to use multiple narrow band filters. You might find yourself, depending on your camera, because I know some of the real nice cameras, they don't spend all that much time to get a decent image, but if they want to get their dream image, they put in an awful lot of time. And I can't forget to show you the 400 millimeter here in GIMP, where I managed to get focus. So this one here, I don't have that much time on it yet. I think I've only got 30 minutes of exposure on each one. I just wanted to manage to get something of both hydrogen alpha and oxygen 3, especially since I was able to get some focus. So here's our HA. So as you can see, when I stretch it a bunch more, the background's really bright, but that's because I haven't removed this here. So as I drag this slider here, what I'm supposed to be removing at this point is noise. My image should be all of this. This is your good strong signal. And you can see it kind of looks like the North American Nebula. It's gone off center. I was trying to get, what I really wanted to do was get centered on this, and I did it kind of quick, and I couldn't tell exactly where that was at when I was just looking at stars. So I thought, well, I'll make sure I get something. And so that's not half bad. And like I say, I'm dealing with the noise issue like I was with the others, but it's something I can work with. And my guiding isn't quite as good with this longer focal length. It's not horrible, but if you want perfectly round stars, this doesn't get it. But that's part of being on a budget. So here we are with the oxygen 3 one. And I was really happy to see a lot of stars. I was, and I figured how lucky can I get that this other camera lens will actually reach focus or very close to being in focus. So you see the oxygen 3 is picking up a lot of stuff. There's your kind of the Cygnus wall area, I guess, and then doesn't have near as much detail here as the HA when it's picking up a lot stronger, but this is primarily an hydrogen alpha target. And I can try combining the two. I tried it a night or so ago after playing with them, and I didn't have a good enough image for it to really show contrast between the red and the blue. So it was like, it really wasn't helping me. I haven't figured out how to get a good enough image, and it may just be because trying to do something like this with my cheap camera is getting to be beyond the limits of what I can do with that camera, because you can't expect it to do what a modern cooled astronomy camera will do. But here I started clipping in, and it's starting to show it, so I can get something. But right now I feel like where I'm doing the best, at least with these fainter objects, is just to stick with one filter at a time, and then maybe as I get more experience I'll figure out a way to combine them better. But what I'll need to do when I learn to combine them, I'll just have the hydrogen alpha in my red channel and the oxygen 3 in both green and blue, which as you can see up here, the red, it shows black, and I'll turn off the red eyeball, and doesn't really affect the view. If I turn off the green, well, it really changes it. So there was a little red, the stars were red. I'm turning that off, so I guess there was one bright star up there. That's what that is. That's not a hot pixel. And then I've got a few other red stars. And then in blue, I don't know how well that shows up on the video, but there's stuff there. If I lose that, so there's with everybody turned off, so there's what's sneaking through in red light through the oxygen 3 filter, and that's just the bright stars. So I'll just I can get into one of my other software and combine these two. And then of course when I do, since I shot these separately where I actually removed the camera filter and then put it back on, the position is not exactly the same, so I have to register them up to each other, because the star jumps. Give you an idea. If you look at that bright star there, when I switched to 03, it jumped from like there up to there. But I can line them up, and then I would just have to crop it. But when I did it before, it didn't do anything. It's more like this area here kind of muddied up what I had here, so I felt like it was actually causing me to lose a little detail. So I'll just keep trying with it and see what I can get, and hopefully here in a few months I'll be able to get a neat looking picture of the Orion Nebula with these filters. Oh, and also I want to try I've noticed people have started taking hydrogen alpha images of galaxies, which is something people never thought of, and they're picking up some stuff. And I want to try that with the Andromeda, because I know I can put this on the 300mm lens and just let it focus at infinity. and maybe I can add a little color to it. Anyway, I hope you got some enjoyment out of this video.